Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, death listeners, peasants, vassals, scum, banking scum, fucking banking scum, fucking Irish banking scum. I'm a useful idiot. Today I'm going to talk about, guess what? Fucking Irish banking scum. So I have a warning right now. If you have a low tolerance for profanity, in case you can't tell, you might turn back now. Because this is the kind of story that really gets me hot under the collar. And we know what that means. And this is a story about fucking Irish banker scum. And I don't mean to differentiate Irish fucking banker scum from all the other fucking banker scum all over the globe. It's just, this is a great example that just came out. It's a taped conversation between Anglo-Irish Bank executives John Bowie, head of capital markets, and Peter Fitzgerald, director of retail banking. And this is a recording that took place back in September 2008. 3 days after the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the unleashing of the financial crisis of 2008 that we're still living with. And these conversations basically reveal how Anglo-Irish Bank was seeking 7 billion euros in financial aid from the Central Bank of Ireland, even though executives knew they would need a lot more than that. And that's the simple surface part of the story. But the actual conversation is what is really incredibly revealing. First of all, let me give you a little background on Anglo-Irish Bank. It was at the center of Ireland's banking crisis and eventually cost Irish taxpayers 30 billion euros as a result of a massive real estate bubble, which is what unleashed or was part of the financial crisis worldwide back in 2008 and is still with us. And eventually Anglo-Irish Bank was rebranded and then eventually liquidated earlier this year. And in total, of the three big Irish banks needed 64 billion euros in bailouts. And that was just within Ireland, not to mention the Eurozone bailouts that they got. But let's get to the gruesome details, I like to say, in this conversation. And first of all, it starts out, quote, yeah, and that number is 7, referring to the 7 billion euros. But the reality is that actually we need a lot more than that, unquote. So first of all, this first quote reveals the fact that all these fucking banker scum know that when they throw these numbers out, they're lowballing. And so they know when they say 7 billion euros that they actually need 30 billion euros. But they don't say that. And they know that. As this conversation goes on, you'll see that. So the next quote is, quote, but you know, the strategy here is you pull them in, you get them to write a big check, and they have to support their money, unquote. So this particular quote reveals the fact that they know that they lowball the number and they rope in the bailout, they rope in the help. And once they get the check, once they get the first installment, then they keep asking for more because they know once the central bank and the taxpayers inject some money in, they have to keep doing it. Because once they got some skin in the game, they really have no choice to turn back. So they get you on the hook. They get the sucker on the hook because they're fucking banker scum. And they know. They're cynical enough to know that once they get some cash, it's going to keep on coming. And then I don't need to explain the arrogance and hubris of all these fucking banker scum. But these two, of course, laughed and joked. And when asked how the figure of 7 billion euros was arrived at, Mr. Bowie replied, quote, I picked it out of my ass, unquote. Wow, that sounds eerily reminiscent of the revelation from Hank Paulson here in the United States when he asked for a $700 billion bailout. And later on, when they asked him why, he just said, I had to pick a really big number. So essentially, Hank Paulson, typical banker scum, used the same technique that these fucking Irish banker scum used as well. And that's the old bait and switch. And that's where you lowball and you say, oh, Hank Paulson, for example, comes in and says, hey, I need $700 billion to bail out these banks. What he really meant to say was, I need somewhere between $17 and $32 trillion to bail out the banks. But of course, nobody would go for that. It was hard enough to get him to swallow $700 billion. And then he comes along and says, oh, well, I'm going to buy up all these toxic assets. And then he blows his nose and decides that he's going to just bail out all the banks directly. So the old bait and switch, nothing anybody can do about it. He got the check, so it doesn't really matter anymore. And then So then we go on to the next quote, and the Irish fucking banker scum quote, if it doesn't look too big at the outset, if it looks big enough to be important, but not too big that it kind of spoils everything, then I think you have a chance, unquote. So this is exactly the strategy I was talking about that Hank Paulson used, king of banker scum, and then these fucking Irish banker scum use the same thing, where they really calculate like the psychological effect of the number and how likely it is that they can play this out and play the suckers, because that's what banker scum do. They play the suckers, and everything they do is about playing the suckers. And part of that is that the bankers create the scams that crash the economy. Then they come begging to the taxpayer, and then they milk the crisis itself. They milk the bailouts. So it's a win-win situation for all the fucking banker scum. And then let's go on to the next quote. Quote, this is a $7 billion bridging, 7 billion euro bridging. So you know it is bridged until we can pay you back, which is never, unquote. So once again, we find out from the fucking banker scum's own words that they're getting what they think is like a bridge loan. So they basically just want to survive for a couple more months on a little liquidity injection, knowing all along that they're not going to pay that back, and they're not going to pay back anything else they get either. So that's another symptom of fucking banker scum across the globe. They know well enough that they're never really going to have to pay the money back. And pretty much most of the bank paybacks here in the United States have been scams as well, because they just borrowed money from the Fed to pay back money to the Treasury. So it's all scam. That's just how it works. And of course, these two Anglo-Irish banker fucking scumbags, Mr. Bowie and Mr. Fitzgerald, now that the stories come out, they deny misleading the central bank, even though it's caught right on tape. And Mr. Fitzgerald said he was, quote, never aware of any strategy to mislead the authorities, unquote. We've got the tape, motherfucker. Listen to it. How can you say that? Oh, that's right. You had your lawyer do it, so you don't even have to come out of your hole. And now there's a discussion of whether they might have an inquiry or investigation. That's one of the funny things, too. Just like all the banker scandals and fraud and corruption here in the United States, it's like they've got the tapes. Just like in the United States. Oh, we've got tapes of these guys talking about selling shit to their investors and their clients, and yet nobody can prosecute them. And here we have a couple of fucking banker scum from Ireland talking about gaming the system, and there's probably not going to be an investigation or inquiry, and they're living high in the hog. I'm sure they were never even prosecuted. And this is another example of fucking banker scum. And these guys are archetypes. This is not an anomaly. This is the standard of the industry. And this is what banker scum are like all over the world. And they come out and they are nice and articulate and polite and full of humility when they're begging taxpayers for money. But behind the doors, just like our politicians, they're laughing their asses off, taking the fucking suckers, all the cretins, all the people that they loathe, the masses, the taxpayers, laughing at what a bunch of fucking suckers there are, and how they're going to game them till the very end. And they're going to game them on top of gaming on top of gaming them. Because the whole system is game for these sick fucks. So anyway, there we have it. The banking scandal coming out of Ireland right now. And I know it's not on the radar. And a lot of people don't care about it, but they should. Because it's these little moments that reveal exactly what the real world is like. And the real world is run by fucking banker scum. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too. And don't be fucking banker scum either.